right and perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about this morning, because there'll come a day. Well, we've spent the past month or so indulging ourselves in the undeniable truth that maybe that day is now, or is at least much, much closer than we ever realized. We've been indulging ourselves in the undeniable truth that for the past 200 years, humankind has been making amazing progress. Overall, on a global level, we are wealthier, healthier, and safer than at any time in human history. Equality, human rights are on the rise, and more countries have democratic forms of government. The reason that's important is because in that form of government, people are allowed to pursue their lives in safety. They're protected from the violence of anarchy, and they're allowed to live in freedom because they're prevented from the violence of tyranny. Those are the two things that democratic governments accomplish: protected from the violence of anarchy and the violence of tyranny. And all of this is the subject of a couple of books that I've been using during this series. The ones up here. The first one is Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker. It's the case for reason, science, humanism, and progress. The other one is Factfulness, 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. That's by the late Hans Rosling. I think these books they came out earlier this year, and it's like they're this much needed antidote to what seems to be an overload of doom and gloom and dire warnings about how crime and violence are skyrocketing, and it's us against a terrifying world of existential threats. And it's just not true. Steven Pinker, in his book, makes the argument that the turning point for humankind happened during a time in Western history that we now call the Enlightenment. It started back in the 18th century. So I want to start out today with a definition of enlightenment that we haven't worked with yet. This is from one of the great German philosophers of the Enlightenment era, Immanuel Kant. This is paraphrased from an essay that he wrote all the way back in 1784. And his essay was called, what else? What is Enlightenment? And so he wrote that the Enlightenment consists of humankind's emergence from its self-incurred immaturity, its lazy and cowardly submission to the dogmas and formulas of religious or political authority. Enlightenment's motto, he proclaimed, is dare to understand. And its foundational demand is freedom of thought and speech. The Enlightenment is like a transition. I like to think of it as a transition into adulthood, out of our adolescence and into adulthood for humankind. We woke up, and then we started growing up. And we realized that there are no supernatural powers or saviors who are coming to rescue us from our human condition. We have the capacity to understand what makes us tick. We have the capacity to understand what makes the universe tick. We can identify the problems that we face, and we can solve them. And some of these problems are hard. They're hard, right? Just because they're hard doesn't mean that they're unsolvable. Doesn't mean we're going to solve every single one of them, but just because they're hard doesn't mean they're unsolvable. And no doubt, I'm not here to say that we should put on our rose-colored glasses and say, oh, we've made progress, everything's great. No, because we have to admit that the Enlightenment caused some problems as well as solving problems. For instance, the Industrial Revolution created jobs and wealth. When the Industrial Revolution came along, people were clamoring to get out of the fields and into the relative comfort of being in an enclosed environment doing that kind of work. And yet it created some other problems: inhumane working conditions and a polluted environment. Now, we've worked to solve those problems, and when we do that, of course, others crop up as well. It's a part of the human condition. We don't always have the wisdom and the experience to understand all the ramifications of a new discovery. Albert Einstein had no intention of inventing a weapon when he discovered that wonderful little equation of his. His equation which says that energy and mass are interchangeable. That simple little formula, E equals mc squared, which led to an understanding of nuclear fission, and from there humankind went in two directions, right? You can use that formula as the basis to produce electricity, nuclear medicine, and other very beneficial things, and you can also use it for the production of weapons, which we did as well. In the language of Kant, when we dare to understand, there is indeed an aspect of Pandora's box. No matter how cautious we are about opening that lid, there's no guarantee that a new discovery won't unleash unintended consequences. So, what do? Do we no longer dare to understand because we're afraid? Or do we keep moving forward and work harder at balancing the equation? And there is an equation here. Let's recall for a moment the subtitle of Steven Pinker's book, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. We need all four of those working together in harmony. Mahatma Gandhi had a weekly newspaper that was called Young India. Back in 1925, he wrote an article called The 7 Deadly Social Sins, which was kind of a riff on any Catholics here? Remember the 7 deadly sins? Kind of a riff on the 7 deadly sins in the Catholic Church. The 6th deadly social sin, and there it is up there, he called science without humanity. And we could call it science without humanism. Now here's what Gandhi meant by science without humanity. Science without humanity is the result of focusing on remaking the world without the corresponding focus of remaking ourselves. In other words, we use our scientific discoveries and our resulting technology to work our will on the physical world, to get what we want out of it, to line our pockets, regardless of whether we've developed the necessary wisdom and that degree of consciousness that it takes to guide our actions to make sure that we are using these discoveries for the aim of progress, which means to advance human flourishing. Each step of the way we have that choice to make. Does this advance human flourishing, or does it just line my pockets at the expense of human flourishing? That's the question we need to be asking constantly. Science and technology, they're used exclusively for individual profit, and when I say individual, I include corporations in that. When it's used exclusively for individual profit or as a means of achieving domination, well, that's plagued the world from the beginning. We've seen it happen time and time again. Scientific discoveries are essentially neutral. The problem is, what do we do with them? No matter what the discovery, ego-driven greed, desire, and selfishness can turn it into something that is detrimental and destructive instead of productive and beneficial. And then it turns into a double-edged sword. Here's what I mean by that. Because the very real human propensity to misuse science and technology, to misuse the products of our creativity, helps to justify people who think that we should try to stifle and ignore scientific exploration and discovery. One example, stem cell research. There have been so many roadblocks in the name of religion getting in the way of stem cell research, and who ends up suffering? Millions of people with Parkinson's and other neurological conditions who might benefit from these advances. And of course, the people who object on religious grounds, well, they simply don't believe that human beings are capable of getting anything right because we're worthless sinners. That's what we're up against. And we in Unity and other like-minded groups vigorously disagree. We are not worthless sinners. The problem lies in the way we think, and we can fix that. The problem lies in the way we think, which is also where the solution can be found. Science with humanity requires an awakened world. And again, that's what enlightenment means, awakened world. People who live from an understanding of our interconnectedness and interdependence. Those are essential parts of this. That's where humanism comes in. Steven Pinker addresses this need toward the end of his book. Here's the quote. He sounds like Gandhi here. He says, "Science is not enough to bring about progress. Everything that is not forbidden by laws of nature is achievable given the right knowledge." But that's the problem. Everything means everything. Vaccines and bioweapons, video on demand, and Big Brother on the telescreen. Progress consists of deploying knowledge to allow all of humankind to flourish in the same way that each of us seeks to flourish. The goal of maximizing human flourishing, life, health, happiness, freedom, knowledge, love, richness of experience, may be called humanism. Don't you think that the goal of maximizing human flourishing, life, health, happiness, freedom, knowledge, love, richness of experience is something that should also be at the very heart of any spiritual tradition? Why should humanist Enlightenment values cause so much fear and opposition from traditional religion? And especially the Christian variety in this country where humanism is used as an epithet, as a bad word, as something that it's bad to be. You know, if you spend any amount of time studying the life and teachings of Jesus, he was all about life, health, freedom, knowledge, love, and richness of experience. You want to talk about richness of experience? He traveled extensively throughout ancient Palestine, which was a land of many different cultures. He shared food with aristocrats like Nicodemus, Roman officials, tax collectors, fishermen, and all sorts of people who were regarded as outcasts. You want to talk about richness of experience. And then we have these quotes attributable to Jesus. From the Gospel of John, he said, "I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance." Or this one, "I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." And this one, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Here's another. "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And what was the other one? Health. Health, right? I mean, health. Wasn't Jesus the guy who went around healing everyone? At sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. So, let's see. I got to go back here and take a tally. Did I get to all of them? Let's see. Life, health, happiness, freedom, knowledge, love, richness of experience, right? I think I covered them all, which leads to only one conclusion. Now, get ready for some heresy, okay? All right? You ready? Here we go. Jesus was a humanist. I should have had Ken up here to make some thunder on the keyboard. Jacob could have flickered the lights a little bit. That would have been fun. But since that went so well, I'm going to say it again. Jesus was a humanist. So many people are afraid of that word. So many people, were afraid that the Enlightenment meant that we had to discard all of our spiritual traditions, throw out the baby with the bathwater, which is not true. The only thing we had to discard was dogma and ideology and the bad theology that was built up around these traditions by misguided human beings. And paradoxically, it was the Enlightenment that gave us the freedom to do that, the freedom to discard the outworn dogma, ideology, and the bad theology that was built up around those traditions. Once we cut through the stuff, the dogma, the ideology, once we cut through that, the core values are still there. They're available to us all. The wisdom, that's what we're after here, the wisdom is still there if, and this is a big if, we're willing to go deeper. I think that's probably why the author of the Gospel of John that we just quoted from rather extensively, that's why the author of that Gospel in the very first verse identifies Jesus as the divine Logos. There's the first line of the first verse of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now the rest of that is all Greek to me, as I'm sure it's all Greek to you. In the beginning was the Word. In arche ein halogos. In arche ein halogos. Logos. There's that word, logos. Comes to us from Greek philosophy, which means the divine reason. The divine reason that's implicit in the cosmos. Ordering it, giving it form and meaning. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, how important this word is. Reason and science have to be part of that ordering principle, but there's another very important aspect. Wisdom, which is the foundation of love and justice. Logos contains all of that. Jesus was regarded, at least by the author of John and the community that gave rise to that gospel, Jesus was looked upon as the embodiment of reason and divine wisdom, which is the kind of wisdom that we need to avoid committing Gandhi's sixth social sin, science without humanity. It's our wisdom traditions, and in this case, the teachings of Jesus, that can help keep human flourishing as a top priority when reason and science lead to something that calls for caution. And I'm proud to say that from the beginning of our movement, Unity has looked at Jesus as that embodiment of the best part of our humanity, which in Unity we call the Christ. And I'm very pleased to see that there are other Christian traditions that are starting to do the same, because we need allies in doing this. We need like-minded people who are on the same page, and it's always good to look out and see that it's happening. I subscribe to a daily meditation from Father Richard Rohr. There he is. He's a Franciscan priest with some very progressive ideas. For example, his meditation from January 15th of this year was titled, Love Needs a Face. And he said, in Jesus, God was given a face and a heart. God became someone we could love. While God can be described as a moral force, as consciousness, as a high vibrational energy, the truth is we don't or can't fall in love with abstractions. So God became a person that we could hear, see with our eyes, look at, and touch with our hands. The fancy term for that is incarnation. Okay, then he brings it home. This was just last Wednesday, June 20th. He posted a meditation with the title, You Are the Imago Dei. Imago Dei means image of God, or we could also say the Christ. Jesus revealed and accepted a paradox. Human and divine are not separate, but one. Maybe we realize subconsciously that if we really recognize our true self, which is this divine indwelling, the Holy Spirit within us, if we really believe that we are temples of God, then we would have to live up. We would have to live up to this incredible dignity, freedom, and love. Okay, do you see where that takes us now? Dignity, freedom, love, health, happiness, and richness of experience. See, we have nothing to fear from reason and science when it's operating in harmony with the whole of the Logos, balanced by that humanism that is embodied in it and embodied in Jesus and embodied in each of us as the Imago Dei, and which we can find reflected in our other wisdom traditions. As long as we get away from the tribalism and the ideology, it's there. You know, I consider myself to be a scientist, and I know many of you think of yourselves that way too. But most of us aren't professional scientists. We don't do it for a living. We're here to excel at something else. Our job is to be the very best Imago Dei, the very best Christ that we can, so that in harmony with science and reason, we can better solve the challenges that are ahead on our quest. And that quest is to bring about an even greater degree of human flourishing in the world. That's what we're about. That's that world that works for all. So, I'm not quite sure that I'm done with all of this yet. We're definitely out of time for today. And next Sunday is July 1st, so we'll probably be switching to something with more of a 4th of July sort of a theme, perhaps mixed with more of what I've been talking about today. We'll see how it goes. Thanks for listening. See you next time.